can it rotate 360? Like, maybe it go around?
For recording audio. No, I know.
Benita, can you see yourself? Oh, that's weird. That's really weird.
All right. So let's report the things that were said in your group. Claire, what did Charlotte say?
I was kind of talking about myself the whole time.
Okay, so let's flip it around. Carly, what did Claire say?
She skipped the ACTs.
Claire said that.
Claire
Yeah,
said,
you're reporting the news here. Go ahead.
Oh, Claire said that she skipped the ACTs for a basketball game.
Okay. B, what did Griffin say?
He had a citrus sale on
Griffin
Sunday.
told you
Griffin told me
that.
that on Sunday he had a citrus sale for band.
Okay.
Citrus sale?
Yeah, they sell like
fruit?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
every
just
$315.
$315.
Good for you.
Like for yourself.
No, for the band.
Julia, what did Chloe say?
Chloe said she went running with the group.
Okay. Not just for fun. Okay. And Liz, tell us what Vanita said.
Benita said that she watched the movie Expelled.
Okay. Was it good?
It was funny, but it was like stupid.
Oh, stupid.
It's on Netflix.
Okay.
Wow.
You do stupid funny every now and again. All right. So you're going to need your notebooks here because we are going to be launching into a new era of study. Today we're going to be starting a unit on the indirect statement. Indirect statement is the act of reporting something that someone says, thinks, knows, believes, feels, hopes, sees, perceives. Bless you. You're reporting that. In case you're wondering, Amy Bishop, where'd you get the cool background for these slides that are about to happen? SlideCarnival.com. Change your life. That's the idea of an indirect statement. So let's give a little contrast. A direct statement. This sand is black. Very direct, to the point. An indirect statement. I see that this sand is black. Let's do another contrast. A direct statement. There are men in the field. This is a very direct observation of what's going on. An indirect statement. I know that there are men in the field. We're going to do one more pair of contrasting sentences between direct and indirect. A direct statement. The sun has set. An indirect statement. I see that the sun has set. So indirect statement is, as we said at the very beginning, reporting something that someone sees, thinks, feels, perceives, hopes, believes. These indirect statements in Latin or in English too, they always start with M&M verbs. We call them M&M verbs because they come from your mind and from your mouth. Another word for M&M verbs are head verbs. M&M verbs and head verbs are the same term. You might hear me use both interchangeably. They mean the same thing. We're going to populate quickly a Latin list. Well, let's think of an English list. What kind of head verbs do you know? M&M verbs. Go ahead. You know. Offhand. In Latin or English. What kind of verb do you do with your head?
Think?
Think? What else?
No.
No.
Oh, no.
Yeah, speak.
Perceive.
Perceive. Yeah.
Believe.
Believe. What else? What do you do with your mind or your mouth? Listen, or in this case, hear. I think that's better. Taste.
Observe.
Okay. Observe. Yeah. Good. Do you feel like you have a good idea of what a head verb is? Slash what an M&M verb is? Okay. This is a Latin list. I don't want you copying this whole thing down now, because I'm going to share the PowerPoint with you. But I just wanted to familiarize you with some of the often seen Latin M&M verbs. We have puto putare, to think, scio scire, to know, the opposite of which is nescio nescire, to not know. Nego, which is first conjugation, so it's going to have the same principal part endings as puto putare. Nego means to deny. Spero means to hope. Sentio, sentire, sensi, to feel. See the connection between Latin and English there? Cogito, another first conjugation, to think. Intellego, intellegere, to understand. So someone who's intelligent understands a lot, right? Dico, dicere, to say. How many of these have you seen before? A lot? Okay.
Fair amount.
Fair amount. There is another half a list here. These, the top two are kind of rare. Constat, constitit, it is decided. Ait, aiunt, this is almost purely relegated to poetry, these forms. And it just means he says or they say. Procerto habere, to be certain. Audio, audiere, to hear, you know that one. Cognosco, cognoscere, to learn. Credo, credere, to believe. Okay. Some of these might be familiar to you, yes? Okay. And I know that constat and aiunt are sort of the ones out of left field there. All right. So let's talk now about the format of an indirect statement. What does it look like? How do we function within it? So to start, look at this picture here. Create a direct statement in English about this picture. You're going to use the word men as the subject. So think to yourself in your notes, what are the men doing?
Killing somebody.
This is so funny.
You don't have to be quite as specific.
Oh.
What are the men doing?
Men are stabbing.
Caesar, right. Let's move a little more general from just stabbing. What are they doing?
Killing.
Killing, right. So that's going to be our direct statement. The men are killing Caesar. Now, form an indirect statement in English about this picture using that same subject, that same format.
Do
was your indirect statement using the same subject.
I see that the men are killing Caesar.
Fantastic. That's exactly what we were going for. I see that the men are killing Caesar. Yeah.
Do you have to use that, or can you just say, I see the men killing Caesar?
I think that makes more sense. Yeah. I know it makes it slightly longer in English, but it separates the head verb from everything else, which is what we're going to need eventually. Okay, so let's construct this indirect statement in Latin. We start out with I see that, and then that direct statement kind of gets embedded in a larger sentence. The embedded statement, the men are killing Caesar. So we're going to start with video, because that's our verb I see. Then we have the word that in our sentence. Do know, from this point forward, there is no Latin word for that. You're just going to have to assume it. Because you're in an indirect statement, you're going to have to put that in there for it to roll. And then we'll have to figure out the rest of it. So far we have video, which is our eminem verb, kicking off our indirect statement. So we have video, that, and then within that embedded direct statement, we have the men. The men are the subject of the verb that is within that, smaller direct statement. The subject of the verb, introduced by the head verb, must be accusative. It can't be nominative because nominative was used for the subject of the head verb. If you have two nominatives, it's going to get very confusing because you don't have an et to join things, you don't have a said to join things. So you have to choose a different case. The case that has been chosen in Latin is the accusative case. So the subject of the verb in the indirect statement is accusative. So our word here is going to be viros for the men. Okay, let's move on in the sentence. We have video. We have this implied that's happening. We did viros already for the men, so now let's talk about this verb that's in this indirect statement. We have are killing, right? The verb that's in the clause, introduced by the head verb, must be an infinitive. Again, you don't want to have a verb that has a personal ending, like I or you or he, because it gets very confusing, especially if you don't have a nominative noun to act as your subject. You have to use a different type of verb in order to relay that same type of action. So we're going to use infinitives within indirect statement. Make sense so far? The verb of killing is nikare. Now you'll notice, last week, and any other previous infinitive lesson in your life, you were always very well trained that when you saw nikare, you said to kill, right? To be about to kill, to have killed, whatever the infinitive was, you started with to, and that was great. Unfortunately, because this verb is acting differently, it's acting as a regular verb, you have to give it a regular verb translation. So the men are killing Caesar. We're using this infinitive, but we're treating it normally. Okay, so we have three mandatory components of an indirect statement. We have the head verb, we have the accusative subject, and then we have an infinitive. So our sentence in total is this: Video viros nikare Caesara. I see that the men are killing Caesar. That was our goal this whole time. We got it. Yeah.
Could you just have the I see the men are killing? Without, is Caesar since you just said there are three important parts, can you just have the men are killing? I
Well-
see that the men are killing.
Yes. I'm taking it backwards to say, if you have those three components in a sentence, you have an indirect statement. To have an indirect statement, you'll have those three components, you might have additional words, but you're right, they're not required to have additional words. As long as you have the core, you're good.
Right.
But then in hindsight, let's say you're reading the sentence in a text, you look, you see a head verb right away, you see an accusative subject, you see an infinitive, you're like, oh, okay, I must be dealing with an indirect statement. Whether or not there are other words there, you're right, it's just kind of icing on the cake. Yeah,
Is it okay to have two accusatives in the
Yep, yep, good question. What Gabby's asking about is that there's viros, which is accusative, and then kaisar, which is accusative. Viros is accusative because it's the subject of nikari. But that verb, and this verb could be really a lot of different things. This is a transitive verb, so it takes an object also. Okay. Now, if you're in Gabby's brain, you might be trying to figure out, well, how am I going to differentiate between which accusative word is the subject of the infinitive and which word is the object of the accusative? And honestly, for whatever it's worth, Latin doesn't play tricks on you. Okay? Latin, 99.3% of the time, will lay it out for you right there. It'll have a head verb, it'll have an accusative noun, and then it'll have an infinitive. So you'll know right away that that first accusative noun is the subject of the infinitive, and then anything else afterwards is pretty much in the word order that you anticipated. So this is one of the few times that Latin does operate with proper word order like we do in English. Okay. Okay, so our basic structure, we have a head verb, we have an accusative subject, and then we have the infinitive. So this is what Griffin was getting at before. As long as you have these three components, you're definitely dealing with an indirect statement. Now, just to clarify a little bit, and if you can't see this chart, because I'm not sure how the font is working out for you guys, the tense of the infinitive will change a little bit, or could change a little bit, and then that'll obviously change the nature of the sentence. But this is not like crazy English. This is just the English that you speak. It's just making accommodations for the fact that there could be a different infinitive. So when you have an infinitive, a head verb, I see that, the men, if it's a present tense infinitive, you say are killing. If it's a perfect tense infinitive, the men killed. Make sense? If it's a future tense infinitive, I see that the men will kill. Okay, it functions pretty normally, exactly like you'd expect. Again, I'm going to be sharing this presentation with you, so if you don't get everything down, don't worry about it. Now, we're going to look at what happens when the head verb itself is perfect, is in the past tense, okay? And I'll give you a more clear explanation of this in a few minutes. So the head verb, if it's I saw, and you have a present tense infinitive, it gets the same tense as whatever the head verb was. If it's a perfect tense verb, it has to be translated in the past somehow. But if you're starting in the past, I saw that the men had killed. Future tense, I saw that the men would kill. That's a weird thing in English. That's one of the ones, if you don't write this whole chart down, you should at least write that one down. That if you're starting in the past with a head verb, and you have a future tense infinitive, the future tense is not will, but would. That's just English being a pain in the bum. All right, your turn. You have a couple minutes. In your groups, try to construct these English sentences into Latin indirect statements. The first one, she thinks that the women fight. He knows that the slave is fleeing. They hear that the king is sleeping. Try at least 2 of these sentences right now.
Okay. What's the thinking?
Cognito. Cognito. Oh, yeah. So, cognito. Yeah.
She thinks that the
What's the word for women?
What?
Femina? Oh yeah, femina. So feminam.
Cogita. So it's cogita, right? No,
Cognitat.
cogita.
And then so
Femina.
feminam.
With an M.
It's going to be because it's
Cognare.
From feminas.
Cogitat feminas pugnare.
Yeah, and that's femina.
And then
Oh, I was thinking, I don't know.
what's now?
Yeah, so Sarah was Sarah one. S.
Okay, unfortunately, we have run out of time in class, so let's just look quickly at your Latin sentences. The first one, you could have either chosen putat or cogitat, either one is just fine. Feminas pugnare. He thinks or she thinks that the women are fighting. Skipped, he knows that the slave is fleeing. Alliunt, they hear that the king is sleeping. Okay, so you really only need, as Griffin was indicating before, those three components, and you have yourself an indirect statement. Sleep on this. We have indirect statement activity tomorrow. Okay?
But there's no homework.
What's that?
No homework.
No, no homework. Okay. It was due today, but I didn't check it, so tomorrow.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.